was working on renewable energies in Africa with technology-driven business and science. I had patents in solar-covered landfill. Had taken a number of years to develop this business, and then I had a very interesting call from people linked to Skolkovo Foundation. And I worked in many countries around the world, always in technology, both university and industry sector. Had been doing international consulting for maybe 15 years now, but at the time, 4 years I've been in Russia. I came to Skolkovo Foundation, which I thought was something that was good for Russia. I very much am still very proud of what we achieved. I think it's the largest technology pipeline in Russia, and I worked very hard to bring foreign multinationals to become part of that project and invest in Russia and do onshore research and development instead of just, I shouldn't say stealing, but selling things and taking the profits back to California or somewhere else. With a small group of 2, 3, maybe 4 other people that were outwardly focused, looking at international business development, we had commitments to almost $1 billion of additional resources to the Skolkovo Foundation. So if we think about $6 billion down, which is state government money, the private sector multinationals, both large Russian and multinational companies, have said we'll put in over $1 billion, and I think this is very good for Russia. Life sciences has always been a little bit more difficult, and that's why I think it's a very timely event that you're holding at the Stem Cell Institute with this Life Science Investor Day. Personally, I think the opportunities are fantastic. We'll talk about that in a moment. Skolkovo has one of its 4 areas being life sciences. I help put together investment funds in the sector. And I think we have an increasingly attractive pipeline of young, vibrant companies in bringing innovations to the marketplace, many with global opportunities linked to that. One, it's an industry I've been linked to all my life. I like very much, but why Russia? So you've got about 140 million people here, another 130 something in CIS countries, the Commonwealth independent states, and that's quite a large market. And you're seeing, I think already Russia is the BRIC country that spends the most per capita on healthcare, full stop. So we've got a increasing middle class who want good health. I think it's a right of every human being. I always quote the 3rd week of 2009. We thought the whole world was about to go bankrupt. This is the worst economic crisis in 100 years. And the S&P 500, all sectors were down by more than 50%, except 2. One was cigarette smoking, which was down 2 or 3%, and the other one was healthcare at 3 to 5%. But if you look at 2009, what was the only industry globally that saw more investment and increase in staff numbers globally? Healthcare. Healthcare is important to people. So as we see a large, I don't think Russia is an emerging economy. It's classed in the BRICS, but I think Russia should be more accurately classed as a great country, becoming great again and very rapidly. So that access to healthcare is important to either the 6th or 9th largest economy in the world, and at present it's underdeveloped and there are many, many opportunities. So last year I think we can value the sector at about just pharmaceuticals at 20 to 25 billion. We saw 13% growth in medical instruments. I don't know the whole sector figures for last year, but I do know some individual companies saw 2 to 3 times more growth than that 13%. So it's an attractive market, it's growing well, and I think this is a good area for both investors and companies involved in the sector. Yeah, I think if you look at global healthcare, and maybe I'll come back to the Russian, if you remind me in a second, come back to the Russian scenario, but global healthcare, I think where the most interest is oncology, so cancer-related medicines, and into that and all medicines is what we call innovative medicines. So learning from what we learned from the human genome, understanding the human body better, and building more intelligent medicines that have less side effects. That's the future, and I think all countries can contribute in that. And Russia has a long tradition in excellence in science, engineering and technology, and I think we'll see Russia contributing to that. Specifically Russia, as I mentioned, I think people have always been looking for better healthcare. We see the private healthcare sector growing very well, but the need to support that with both hospitals and privatised healthcare. You've got the area of, in this country, it's more what we call the chronic diseases, such as diabetes and heart disease. In Russia, we have, unfortunately, a large incidence of these diseases, but they are going underdiagnosed and undertreated. And the pharmaceutical industry traditionally likes these because you treat people every day of the year, so it's good for both sides of the equation, delivering healthcare and making returns on investment. In medical devices, I see huge opportunities for this country from a number of reasons. The government's been putting huge resources, I think in excess of 15 billion, into a modernisation plan. No matter how rich Russia is or becomes, it cannot modernise healthcare without accessing technology to overcome that gap in what's today in Russia an international best practice. So where are those opportunities for Russia in improvement in technologies that can upgrade and modernise healthcare in a country like Russia, the largest country in the world, and then export those to the rest of the world? And I think things like what we call POCT, point of care testing, this is a global trend, molecular diagnostics, but why might Russia win and be competitive in this sector? One area, particularly medical devices, we saw just under 1.5 million Russians move to Israel. And since Israel's blossomed as a country, why? As far as medical devices, Russians are spectacular at mathematics, physics, software development, and most importantly, algorithm development. So we can be thinking point of care testing, innovative technologies in diagnosing disease and treating disease because of our strengths in mathematics and software, is my belief. The other area which is very closely related to that is electronic medical records, and I'll come back to that later, as in a whole area I think is very attractive. But you've also got other areas of managing disease. So I mentioned chronic disease, so not only treating them but managing them. We've seen fantastic programs in China where people manage diabetes patients better, delivery of treatment. That's still not happening well in Russia. So anyone involved in delivery of diabetes treatments, diagnosing, this is a big, big area. Mobile health in the biggest country in the world. I think we have more mobile users than anyone else in Europe already. That's the equivalent of Germany and UK combined. And how do we deliver health through mobile interfaces? So that's one. Russians are already playing. I think they'll get better and better because the need is great here and good solutions can be sold to the rest of the world. It's a loaded question. I think one always has to answer that honestly, but we've seen the Ministry of Health and indeed the whole Russian government working in this direction. In the healthcare industry, and particularly large contracts, we still see, unfortunately, the influence of corruption. I think the Ministry of Health and the Russian government as a whole is working against this. But the more investors can insist upon good governance and transparency in the companies they're investing and the way they behave, I think that's the best way to de-risk your Russian investments. And the more we demand the local stock exchange, which is working in exactly the same direction, to be having good reporting standards, good transparency and best management practices with a board structure, reporting to the markets well, I think Russia's working in a positive direction and things will only get better. There's two areas that are particularly attractive, I think, in Russia today. One, Russian investors traditionally like bricks and mortar, things you can pick up and hold. I can't change that trend. They also like to get rich in 2 to 3 years, double or treble their money in 2 to 3 years. I can't change that. So in our own case, we're trying to deliver investment strategies that are listed, so we have liquidity. That's Skolkovo Rus Innovations, so a private sector Skolkovo, to try and get investors who can invest. What we'd like is a broad spectrum of Russians investing in the upside of commercializing Russian technology. That's for the future, that's what we'd like to see. If we look at MySex today, even the innovacy sector, it's mostly illiquid. There's 12 ZPIFs, these mutual fund structures, and about 16 companies. They don't see a lot of activity there. That needs to change if that's going to be better for investors in the future. Exits is always the focus of good investing. So if I come back and think what sort of opportunities are happening and when. So if we look at some of the more mature companies in Russia, and Gor Securities, where we're sitting today, have sort of do analysis in this sector, we're seeing a gradual trend towards the Russian pharmaceutical industry, who's been doing a lot of generics, reselling, maybe even rebranding, to becoming what are termed fully integrated pharmaceutical companies. I think the leader in the country is Farm Standard, but if you look at their share price over the last 12 months, it's reduced by half. So they've restructured and put a lot of their OTC under a new, been acquired by a group called Beaver out of Singapore. There's more as a maintaining stock presence in there, but the company's not performed well. But there are other companies in the private sector that are so non-listed. I like companies like Our Pharma, who've been evolving well, increasing their revenues, thinking more about how I build medicines in Russia, fully compliant with Pharma 2020, where we want more than half our drugs produced in Russia. So these sorts of companies have a great future. Of the listed companies, I think groups like the pharmacy chain, 36.6, seeing nice metrics that are growing, people again spending more on healthcare. And in the listed pharmaceutical companies, groups like Protech, I can quote our RMG analysts who like them very much. They have good capital resources, they're becoming vertically integrated, so able to go across the market. And I think even one, at least from our analysts here, we're bullish that this is a good investment today. In the last 5 years, you've seen the Russian government spend $20 billion on what we term the innovacy sector. If I'm an investor and someone else had wasted that money, I should now be looking for companies who are performing well, starting to get meaningful cash contracts, and a good what we term growth investment. There's a gap in the market today of the government stimulates the sector, but the private sector must take the relay. And these growth opportunities, particularly in healthcare, I think will become more evident. I don't think yet we can say we have a Genentech or an Amgen, but something like your Stem Cell Institute, it's playing with innovative medicines. It will be innovative medicines where we see nice things happening. And I think one should be looking at this medical devices, POCT, point of care testing. At present, unfortunately, the industry is dominated by foreign produced drugs. So the largest pharmaceutical company in Russia today is Sanofi. They run 62 clinics today for testing their drugs that were developed offshore, not developed onshore. And I think Mr. Putin in December 2010 said, you will in the future produce locally and develop drugs locally by 2020. This is good for the Russian sector. It's still, unfortunately, being dominated by, in the medical instruments, the large players in imaging take up most of the resources. In selling of drugs, it's still offshore pharmaceutical groups from USA, Europe, China, Japan. We need to change that and drive that forward. Their IRRs, because they're multinational companies, it's sometimes difficult to look beneath the figures. But when you do look beneath the figures, I know at least for 2012, maybe a little bit less in 2013, but 2012, Russia was well seen as number 2 or 3 globally for many of the leading pharmaceutical and medical instrument companies as their growth markets. They need double-digit growth and they see it in Russia. I think that trend will definitely continue. Does that mean I should invest in offshore healthcare providers in Russia to get rich? that may be some of the solution, but I think there are opportunities that are emerging here that are very, very attractive, and maybe speak about those in a moment.